Book Award, the Sunday Times Young British Writer of the Year Award, the French Prix d'Astrolabe, the Wolfson Prize for History, the Scottish Book of the Year Award, the Duff Cooper Memorial Prize, the Asia House Award for Asian Literature, the Vodafone Crossword Award for Non-Fiction, and has, prior to the shortlisting of Return of a King, been longlisted 3 times for the Samuel Johnson Prize. We now invite Mr. William Dalrymple for his session.
So, I'd love you to imagine yourselves away from a nice early winter's morning in Chandigarh, and imagine yourselves for a minute very far from here on a cold, bleak winter's night in 1837, and you're standing on the edge of the desert between Meshed in northeast Iran and Herat, now in Afghanistan. And a war is about to break out. The new Shah of Iran, Mohammed II Qajar, has made a promise in his coronation speech that he will take back for Iran the disputed border city of Herat. Herat, in many ways, the Renaissance Florence or the Mughal Agra of Afghanistan. In the 15th and 16th century, it was in Herat that the greatest of all Muslim miniature painters, Bizad, produced his greatest masterpieces. The great university madrasa of Gohar Shad produced some of the greatest and most subtle works of Islamic philosophy. And the Persians have long coveted this city, and the king has announced that he is going to retake it. So for the previous month, regiments of cavalry, marching infantry, squadrons of artillery have been passing up this road, great clouds of dust moving from Tehran up to the border. And now, in the middle of the night, it's a November night, at 2 in the morning, for the first time in weeks, the road is quiet. This calm before the storm breaks. Everyone expects the Shah to signal the advance into Herati territory within the next 24 hours. And everything, all the cards are now stacked. The pieces are in place for the beginning of this campaign. And then about 2 in the morning, as you're standing there, you can see this horseman riding towards you, one single figure coming up the road, the military road from Tehran. And as he draws near, you can see that this is a young 21-year-old East India Company officer. He's wearing the red uniform of the East India Company. But you can also see as he draws near that this guy is absolutely exhausted. This man is Henry Rawlinson, officially the Bengal artillery advisor with the Royal Persian Army, but of course, as is always the case in these stories, secretly a British spy. And he's there to send intelligence back to London on the state of the Persian army, and particularly the Russian advisors who are working with the Shah. But he's been riding now for about 2 days and 1 night, with hardly a break, all the way from Kermanshah in the far west of Iran. And he's coated in dust, he's totally exhausted. And at some point, he's so exhausted that he actually leans forward onto the mane of the horse and falls fast asleep in the saddle. And he's got stirrups, he's a good rider, so he doesn't fall off. But at some point, the horse, realizing that the rider is no longer giving it any instructions, just begins to wander off the road. And at some point, he begins to slip off the saddle, jerks awake, and realizes that he is completely lost. That his horse has wandered into the desert. It's a dark winter's night. It's now very cold in the desert. The temperature drops very quickly. And he has no idea where he is. Now, even at the best of times, even today, the borderlands of Afghanistan and Iran are not the kind of place you particularly want to get lost, even in the middle of the day. Even today, it's the main smuggling route for all the opium and heroin coming out of Iran. Then, in the early 19th century, it's dacoit territory, what we in Scotland call debatable land. Land claimed by two countries and therefore a good refuge for those seeking to flee the justice of either. And Rawlinson realizes the danger he's in, but there's nothing he can do. And so he's very grateful when about 6 in the morning, the first light begins to show itself on the Kohi Shah Jahan Mountains, a little faint pink glow on the distant mountains. And he immediately can work out where east is, therefore where west is, where north is, where south is. And he turns his horse around, ready to regain the military road. And he rides back for about an hour, and just as he thinks he must be within sight of regaining the road, he sees what he least wants to see coming towards him. At about 7 in the morning, on the 12th of November, 1837, Henry Rawlinson sees coming towards him a group of armed horsemen fanning out across the whole breadth of the valley, cutting him off from the road that he's about to regain. And they're armed, and they're heading fast towards him. So what does he do? What would any of us do in that situation? He gets off the horse, he finds an overhanging crag of rock, almost a cave, but not quite, ties the horse up, and hunkers down to see what it is that's coming towards him. Is it drug smugglers? Is it Dakus? Is it the Afghans going to raid the Persians? Is it the Persians going to raid the Afghans? What he sees in the next few minutes changes the history not just of Afghanistan and Iran, but also of India and the whole region for 100 years. Because what he sees coming towards him, actually, I'm not going to tell you quite what he sees coming towards him yet. I'm going to make you wait for a bit. So where are we? This is 1837. This is 12 years after Waterloo. Napoleon is in exile in St. Helena. The French have been kicked out of the imperial game. And two forces are left, dividing Asia between them. Down here to the south, the British, but not the British government. One of the weirdest freaks of the history of this period is that India in 1837 has just been taken over, not by the British per se, but by a British corporation, a British company. In 1837, the East India Company still has a head office that is only 200 meters long, 5 windows wide, and has a permanent staff of only 35 people. Smaller than many corporations in modern Chandigarh. And yet that corporation has gobbled up almost all the old Mughal Empire in as little as 45 years. And most of India is now ruled from a boardroom in London of a corporation. There is no modern equivalent to this. And our history books, I don't think, have sort of emphasized the sheer oddness of this piece of history. It's not the British government. It is one British company. And it has moved since the 1740s from having 800 security guards guarding the 3 main settlements, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, to, by 1837, an army of 260,000, which is twice the size of the peacetime British army at that time. So a company. So there is no modern equivalent to this. Halliburton, Blackwater, these sinister American security companies are nothing on the East India Company. There is no, Pepsi-Cola or Google or Microsoft or Apple do not have regiments of infantry and fighter jets and fleets, however sinister they are, however much they are capable of buying weak governments in the way that, say, Enron was able to buy up the power rights to most of Maharashtra through corrupt means 10 years ago. The East India Company was on a completely different scale. It is the ultimate example in world history of corporate irresponsibility on a continental scale. And anyway, so in 45 years, they've got as far, by 1837, as the Sutlej. And the border is not so far from here, at Ludhiana. And that is the northern border looking on to Ranjit Singh's Punjab. And beyond is the free Punjab of Ranjit Singh, and beyond that, a patchwork of rival warlord-run kingdoms in what's now Afghanistan. Beyond that is the other big European power of the region, Russia. And just as the British company, the East India Company, have been using advances in technology, ballistics, and modern shell technology, particularly advances in horse cavalry, in horse artillery, the ability to be able to drag guns onto a battlefield, swivel them round, exploding shells, have used this to defeat hugely larger Asian cavalry armies. So, using exactly the same technology, the Russians have been defeating first the Ottoman Turks, then the Persians, then a whole succession of khanates in Central Asia, and have been moving south at 100 miles every 10 years since the time of Peter the Great. And any old buffer sitting in a gentleman's club in Pall Mall can see that these two empires, the Russians moving southwards and eastwards, and the British moving up from Madras, if you like, northwards and westwards, that these two worlds are going to come into contact with each other. But equally, any accountant controlling the purse strings of either of those armies can see that there's still many thousands of miles between them, and that however much the hawks on both sides might like to create a war, advance forward, take things into their own hands, actually, there is no imminent threat to one by the other, because there's still the whole of the Ranjit Singh Punjab, which occupies almost exactly the borders of modern Pakistan, up to the Khyber Pass, but not including Sindh. And then beyond that, there's the whole of modern Afghanistan, and then the different khanates, Bukhara, Khiva, Samarkand, all this Central Asia. So, despite a lot of pamphleteering, despite a lot of propaganda, particularly by British hawks, saying we've got to get up to Afghanistan, we've got to take this vital strategic territory, deprive the Russians of this important roundabout, despite that, no government has authorized any expedition to do so, because there is no good reason to do so, because it cannot be made into the threat the hawks claim it is. Until our guy, Henry Rawlinson, sitting on his arse in the steppe in 13th of November 1837, sees what it is coming up the valley towards him. What it is not the Russians, it's not the Persians, not the Afghans, not the drug smugglers, not the Dakus. It is an entire regiment of fully uniformed Imperial Russian Cossack cavalry. And they have been discreetly making their way through Iran, and they've only thrown off their disguises and got into their uniform and put up their flag, having come off the military road. And they're heading into Afghanistan. And they are pretty sure that no one is going to see them, because this is a forgotten back way into Afghanistan, and no one would normally be there. But by the sheer chance of Rawlinson falling off his horse, getting lost in the middle of the night, being too ambitious in his travel plans, and getting lost up this valley, he happens to see the Russians going in. And for a British intelligence officer of the 1830s, this is the golden bullet. This is the equivalent of the weapons of mass destruction in the Iraq War. This is the piece of intelligence which can turn everything around. And Rawlinson immediately realizes this. And so within minutes, you have Morse code being tapped out from the embassy in... I'm taking it forward too far. Within, you have camels being sent across the desert to Shiraz, steamers chugging across the Mediterranean, up the Red Sea, cavalry runners, post-haste to Port Said, steamers chugging across the Mediterranean to Marseille, which is as far as the Morse code has got to that stage. And then dip, 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 the Morse code gets sent off to Downing Street. Someone picks up this thing with the Foreign Office. The Russians are going into Afghanistan. And immediately, the wheels of war begin to turn. And 18 months later, an army is assembled in Ferozpur. How far is Ferozpur from here? 5 hours, yeah. So 5 hours from here, just over the border, an East India Company army is ready to go in. And the British have a cover story, as is always useful on these occasions. And it's this guy, Shah Shuja ul Mulk. Now, you'll all know Ahmad Shah Durrani. Ahmad Shah Durrani, the founder of the Afghan state, who, again, not so far from here. How far is Panipat from Chandigarh? 150 miles. Okay, so 150 miles from this spot, Ahmad Shah Durrani in 1761 totally and catastrophically defeats the Maratha cavalry, who've been welling up from the Maratha hills for the previous 100 years, defeating the Mughals. Unstoppable, it seems, until Ahmad Shah Durrani, coming down from Afghanistan with new artillery technology again, totally makes mincemeat of the Maratha army. And a bare fraction of this great host of cavalry survived this battle. Now, Shah Shuja is his grandson, and he has inherited the fragments of Ahmad Shah Durrani's empire, which at its peak embraced the whole of Afghanistan, a lot of Iran, modern Kashmir, the Punjab. You here in Chandigarh would have been subject to Ahmad Shah Durrani's empire had you been around in the 1780s or 1790s. And if you were a turban Sikh, it wouldn't necessarily have been a very comfortable period in your history. So Ahmad Shah Durrani, great iconoclast, burns Amritsar twice, hates Sikhs particularly. And so no friend of the Chandigarh Literary Festival, I think it's fair to say. But his grandson is a very different figure, as is often the way, the sons and grandsons of great military leaders. This guy likes poetry, loves gardens, is into jewelry, will probably be interested in sort of scent, and writes beautiful prose, is a great Persian poet, is absolute rubbish on the battlefield, and loses a whole succession of wars, losing almost all the territory that his grandfather had gained. And by the age of 21, is kicked out of Afghanistan, and on his way through the Punjab, Ranjit Singh, in one of his less honourable moments, I'm ashamed to say, in Sikh company here, gulls him of his one last remaining treasure, which is the Kohinoor diamond. And Shah Shuja arrives penniless. He's quite ingenious, Shah Shuja, and when Ranjit Singh locks him up in Lahore, he manages to escape. He has somebody else in his bed. He digs a hole under the bed, through 2 stories, through a taikana, up through a thing, into a drain, escapes through the drain. There's a boat at the other side of the Ravi. He escapes over the boat. A horse is waiting. And he makes it through to the East India Company at Ludhiana. The East India Company, this is 1809, this is nearly 40 years earlier than the incidents we've been talking about. He arrives here, this bedraggled 22-year-old, penniless, and the British resident in Ludhiana, Sir David Octoloni, realizes that this is a useful character. So rather than sending him away, he's offered asylum, and he's given a little show, enough money to put up a court, to run a show, until one day he may be useful. Now, in 1837, that moment comes. So after 25, whatever it is, 30 years, 40 years of paying this pension to this guy, suddenly the British can cash in their winnings, so to speak. And they suddenly announce that they've realized that Shah Shuja is the legitimate king of Afghanistan, and they're going to put the legitimate king of Afghanistan back on the throne, and what we today call regime change. Now, Afghanistan has been perfectly well governed up to this point, in the absence of Shah Shuja, by this man in the middle, Dost Muhammad Khan. Dost Muhammad Khan, renowned for justice and a great military leader, has been welcoming embassies from the company and from the Russians. But the British have convinced themselves, because of this sighting of the Cossacks going into Afghanistan, that he's about to form a close anti-British alliance with the Russians. Now, this is actually rubbish. Dost Muhammad is a very wily character. He wants good relations with all his neighbors. And the young British officer in Kabul, a man called Alexander Burnes, a handsome devil, writes a whole succession of, not emails, but telegraph messages, urgent dispatches to Calcutta saying, there's no need to invade Afghanistan. Dost Muhammad Khan is not our enemy. He was very happy to open an alliance with us. If we offer more than the Russians, he will throw the Russians out. But no one's listening to him because Alexander Burnes is too famous, too clever, too good-looking, and all his superiors hate him. He's written a travel book. He's been received by the king. He's been on book tours around France. He's got mistresses and girlfriends hanging on every coattail of him. And all his superiors higher up in the service absolutely loathe his guts. And so he's ignored. And various jealous figures, most importantly the head of British intelligence in India, a man called Colonel Wade, based in Ludhiana. It's all a good Punjabi story, this. Colonel Wade says, ignore young Burnes, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. In fact, Burnes does know what he's talking about. But also Burnes is very ambitious, and he's effectively bought off. He's offered the position of deputy governor in Afghanistan and a title. He's going to become Sir Alexander Burnes. And with that, as is the great honourable tradition in my country, he goes immediately quiet and supports this project, which he doesn't believe in. So the first plan is that Ranjit Singh will invade the Afghanistan for the British. British will give him arms, support him, and give him all the assistance he will need to invade his old enemy, Dost Muhammad. But Ranjit Singh, as we all know in this room, is far too wily a character to fall for that one. Ranjit Singh has previously, 15 years earlier, taken Peshawar, and it's been a complete pain in the arse for him ever since, because he's got the Pathans to deal with every 5 years. I mean, there's the kind of 19th century equivalent of suicide bombings. The Pathans go around blowing up Sikh barracks, killing people on the roads at night, and it's tying down huge quantities of his army, just keeping Peshawar quiet. And he knows that while quite possibly he could go in and take Kabul, if he was to take it, he will have much more trouble than he needs, and that his empire has a natural border at Peshawar, and so he doesn't take this. He has just the previous year had his leading general, who I'm sure you all know, Hari Singh Nalwar, has been killed on Jamrud. So this solidifies his certainty that he does not want to take Afghanistan. But also, he doesn't want the British to take Afghanistan either, because he realizes if there's British Punjab here in this area and southwards, plus the British occupied state in Afghanistan above him, it's just going to be a matter of time before the nutcracker cracks his Sikh Khalsa in half. So he goes out of his way, while being very friendly and receiving the Governor-General and getting his sister Emily Eden drunk and all the rest of it, he goes out of his way to actually make it impossible for the British to pass through the Punjab. And so they have no option but to do an enormous long detour from Ludhiana down the Indus, down through what is effectively now Quetta, through Baluchistan deserts, and then go up through the Bolan Pass, which is a 4,000-mile detour in the middle of summer. So Ranjit Singh plays a blinder and negotiates a very clever treaty. So the army sets off in 1839, and being the high Victorian period it is, it's an enormous army, with servants outnumbering fighting men about 10 to 1. 14,000 East India Company sepoys, 6,000 irregular cavalry hired by Shah Shuja, mainly from Rohillas in UP, 21,000 troops in all, accompanied by 38,000 Indian camp followers. They march off to war with 30,000 camels. The leading British brigadier needs 50 camels to carry his uniforms, while the general needs 260 to carry all his medals and changes of clothes and underwear and what have you. And one regiment comes with its own pack of foxhounds. There are 300 camels that carry nothing but Madeira and wine for the officers. There are 30 camels carrying nothing but cheroots and cigars. There is one camel that goes all the way into Central Asia carrying nothing but eau de cologne for the officers. The one thing they haven't got is a map, because there isn't one. They have absolutely no idea where they're going. And so this sort of rather ludicrous, you can see this sort of wonderful sort of dancing fakir at the bottom, stray sort of soldiers going through a river over here. It's a rather wonderful cartoon, this one. You've got the Munshi in his wagon, a treasure chest, whole herds of sheep for dinner, and goats being herded. A stray prisoner who presumably got caught stealing something out of a tent somewhere. And off they go. And they go, anyone been up the Bolan Pass? Anyone taken the railway from Lahore, from Quetta to Lahore? Well, anyway, this is the way the railway goes today, but no railway in 1837. It's now also the main Taliban supply route from the Quetta Shura through into modern Afghanistan. And as I say, they've absolutely no idea where they're going. And this is a kind of typical scene one can see anywhere in the region today. Traveller asks passing locals, which way to Afghanistan? And they say, oh, no problem, sir, Side Jai, just go straight. The result being, you see one lot go up this path, another heading up this way. They've got armies heading off in every direction. And they get completely lost. They haven't got any water, they run out of food. It's a complete cock-up. But they lose about 4,000 troops through incompetence and sniping by Baluchis. Nonetheless, such is the momentum and so much has been put into this invasion that they can't go back. And so they carry on, and eventually they break out through the Kojak Pass into the Dasht, the meadows south of Kandahar, near Helmand, where the British Army just left on Monday from, in our latest, most successful adventure in Afghanistan. They arrive at Kandahar, and such is the shock of an army invading successfully through this ludicrous route that the rulers of Kandahar just run off without a fight. And Shah Shuja is able to go into his grandfather's mausoleum, Ahmed Shah Abdali's mausoleum in Kandahar, still there today, very similar building to Safdarjung's tomb in Delhi, and he goes and gets the barakat from his ancestor, and at this point, British intelligence intervenes. Now, as we all know from James Bond films, British intelligence never gets anything wrong. And so some chap turns up on a horse and says, look, we just got word in from Ghazni and Kabul. There's absolutely no fortifications between here and your goal, so you can leave your big siege weapons behind. Now, this poor army, these sepoys, largely guys from Bihar and Awadh, UP, have hauled these enormous siege weapons, the super guns of their day, the Bofors of their day, up the passes, down the hills. And so they're very relieved that they don't have to hold these things any further. They leave them in Kandahar and set off towards Ghazni, only to find that for once British intelligence has maybe made an error. And the walls of Ghazni are not just rather substantial, they're actually the largest fortress in Central Asia. So lots of red faces in the intelligence wing. But again, they can't go back. There's nothing for them to do. So some gallant chap promises to roll a barrel of gunpowder at the main gate. They blow it up, and then they go in the first day. This is the assault. And Ghazni is conquered in 24 hours. And this has been armed and refortified and prepared for siege by Dost Muhammad for 6 months, since it was clear that the British were thinking of invading. And he's put all his resources into rebuilding the fortifications. And the fact that the British take this in 12 hours without siege weapons means that this guy throws in the towel at this point. He rides off with his family over the Hindu Kush, past Bamiyan, off into Bukhara, where he's seized by the Emir of Bukhara and thrown into prison. And 2 weeks later, Shah Shuja can walk into his old fortress, the Bala Hisar, and returns to the throne 50 years after he left it at the age of 21. He's now a rather fuller figure of 51, a little greying at the edges, but he's back home. And for everyone involved in this expedition, which at various points looked like an entirely disastrous business, for everyone involved, this is a huge triumph. They've captured Afghanistan. It looks fabulous. If you look at the map, Afghanistan controls the ways from Iran to China, the main trading routes from Bukhara, Samarkand and Khiva down here to the Punjab, Delhi and all the markets of India. And the British suddenly realized that they've got this enormous chunk of territory which they've conquered with virtually no serious military engagement. The attack on Ghazni is the only time that they actually have a fully fledged assault at any point in this campaign. Otherwise, as happened in 2001, it's a walkover. And everyone is very full of themselves. The foxhounds are taken out hunting. Alexander Burns throws a Hogmanay party wearing his kilt and drinking whiskey. And I don't know whether Bagpiper was around then, but Johnny Walker certainly wasn't. But anyway, he has a big party. Lady Sale, the general's wife, comes up from Agra with her seeds from her kitchen garden, her grand piano, which somehow makes it over the passes on a camel, presumably, and her unmarried daughter, Alexandrina, who quickly gets engaged to one of the officers. There's lots of parties and balls. And the whole thing looks like it's been a complete cinch. And in the overconfidence of this conquest, the British then begin to make a whole series of fantastically stupid mistakes. The number one of which is to, rather than move into the Bala Hissar, the fortress, they want Shah Shuja to have that because he's meant to be the ruler and they're meant to be just putting him back on the throne. They decide that they're just going to put their tents in the valley outside Kabul. And as you can see from this picture, here is Kabul. This is the Bala Hissar. These are the walls of the city. And this is the empty territory outside the city. This is, as the incredibly dim Scottish clergyman attached to the force realizes, this is a completely indefensible camp. And that anyone with even a pea shooter can shoot down on these tents from every side, which is, of course, why it's the site of the American embassy today. But at first, there's absolutely no threat. There's no one's fighting at them. No one's resisting them. And so they simply turn their tents into wooden buildings, and they build a little palisade around it. But it's like a cantonment outside Chennai or Bombay. It's not a defensible, impregnable citadel, which is what you need, obviously, in Afghanistan. And then, having conquered Afghanistan, again, it couldn't happen today. They go off and invade somewhere else. Not Iraq in this case, but Hong Kong. The British Empire's most moral war, the Opium War of 1841, when the British go to war with the right to trade freely, even if what you're trading in is opium, heroin, and extremely contagious narcotics, addictive narcotics. They pull out 3/4 of the army from Afghanistan, and it gets sent off to Hong Kong to blow up the Summer Palace in Beijing and all this sort of thing, and capture Hong Kong. And Hong Kong becomes British at this point. And just happened in Afghanistan, an overconfident America, having conquered Afghanistan, goes and conquers Iraq and takes its eye off the ball. Exactly the same happens here. And all the promises they've made to the Afghans to build roads, to develop infrastructure, to help Shah Shuja are forgotten. Because it all proves to be too expensive. Resources are diverted towards the China coast, Canton, Hong Kong, and everyone forgets about Afghanistan. And then they realize, the subsequent year, what everyone realizes every time that they conquer Afghanistan, is that it's a myth that Afghanistan cannot be conquered. Afghanistan has been conquered over and over and over and over again. Conquered by the Greeks, the White Huns, the Kushans, the Mongols, the Moguls, the Timurids, Persians, Qajar, Nadir Shah. Everyone has conquered Afghanistan. What they cannot do is they cannot hold it. And the reason they cannot hold it is the combination of extremely inhospitable mountainous terrain with very poor communications, and the fact that it's a very poor country. And so if you conquer the Punjab, you can tax all the rich merchants in Amritsar and Jalandhar, and you can tax the farmers, you can reap the harvest, you can rip everyone off, which is what empire is all about. But if you conquer Afghanistan, you can't recoup your losses. You can conquer it, but it will be a huge expense to keep the roads open. The locals do not like being conquered, so they'll snipe at you from every pass, and you'll have no money to pay it because there's no one you can tax. There's only about 20 merchants in Kabul, and they're all Sindhi anyway. Incidentally, the Hinduja's ancestors were responsible for financing a lot of the money to Shah Shuja for this war. So the things keep going in a very similar fashion. And Shikapuri Hindus run the Hindu Banyas run the arms financing business in the 19th century, as they have done throughout subsequently. So they look at the balance sheets, and the company is about profit. In the 19th century, the British dress up empire with all sorts of highfalutin ideas, and they do build law courts and and do various nice things and build cricket pitches and so on. But the company is entirely about profit. It doesn't even pretend to be about anything else. It is entirely about making money for its shareholders. And if Afghanistan is costing more than it is bringing in, the accountants have the final say, and so expenses have to be cut further. So a message is sent to Kabul, to Henry McNaughton, the man who runs the operation, saying you've got to cut the expenses. And the only way they can cut expenses is to break their promises of subsidies to the border tribes. Now, at every point in the history of the frontier, the Afridis, the Ghilzai, these frontier tribes, have claimed radari, road tax, which is a fancy Persian word for protection money. And the deal has always been that if you pay them, they'll keep the roads open, and if you don't, they'll plunder everything that passes. And so Nadir Shah, going off to conquer Mughal Delhi in 1739, pays the Afridis on the way out, and he pays them on the way back. And so he gets the Koh-i-Noor, the Darya-Noor, the Peacock Throne back to Tehran. But McNaughton makes the fatal error of promising them 100 lakh a year in Radari, and then cutting it back to 10 lakh. And all the Ghilzai chiefs just nod and say, no problem, sir, no problem. They go off home. The next morning, the postboy is found with his neck cut. Not a letter, not a sweetmeat, not a single pan passes through the Khyber Pass from that point. And the British in Kabul find that they're completely cut off, not just from India and their supply routes, but also from the outlying garrisons in Jalalabad and Kandahar. There is no messages coming in. Nothing is getting through. And at this point, Alexander Burnes, the oversexed young under-governor in his kilt, decides to seduce the girlfriend of Shah Shuja's leading military commander. Now, this is a mistake. And gentlemen, if there's one thing to take away from this story today, it is that you do not do in Afghanistan as you would do in the Punjab. And as the leading Persian historian of the period, Mirza Atta, puts it, these English, the general turns up beside Alexander Burnes' house at 3 in the morning with all his mates and says, we've got to go in there, my girlfriend's in there. He says, now we are justified in throwing off the English yoke. They stretch the hand of tyranny and dishonor private citizens great and small. Making love to a slave girl isn't worth the ritual bath that follows it. But we have to put a stop to this right here, right now. Otherwise, and this is the key quote to take home, gentlemen, today, otherwise these English will ride the donkey of their desires into the field of stupidity. Now, we've all ridden our donkeys all sorts of places, but you don't do it in Afghanistan. You keep your donkey well tethered in the stable of chastity, I think is probably the phrase. Anyway, so Burnes is sitting in his house when all these guys turn up. They burn down the front of the house. He gets into Afghan dress, but they catch him. They cut off his head. They play football with his head for a bit. Then they hang up his body on a meat hook. McNaughton goes out the following day to try and negotiate a settlement, and the peace negotiators shoot him dead with a gun. And his head and his blue-tinted spectacles and his top hat are all put up on the same meat hook next to Alexander Burnes. And everyone realizes that it's open day now, and the Afghans pour in from the countryside. There's no central planning, there's no grand organization. Everyone's after themselves, but they surround the cantonment. They capture the British cannon from an outlying depot, and they pull them up onto the hill above the cantonment and just shell wildly. They're not very good shots. A lot of the shells go all the wrong places, but it's not exactly rocket science. They just put their gun up at the top of the hill and they shoot down. And as you can see, it's 2 years later, it's still basically tents in a valley. There's a few barrack blocks, and there's the odd wall, exterior wall going round, but it's an indefensible site. And the British have lost their ammunition, and they've lost their supplies of food. And as they say in Game of Thrones, winter is coming. The snows are billowing in from the Hindu Kush. They haven't got anything to eat. They're running out of ammunition. They keep up a show of resistance for 3 months. The leading British general isn't much use on this occasion. This is William Elphinston, a veteran of Waterloo. Elphinston gets onto his horse. He falls off his horse. The horse falls on him, and that's the end of Elphinston. And that's more or less the end of the resistance, too. So by December 1841, it's clear that this is all over. And the British managed to negotiate quite a generous settlement. They have to leave their big guns behind. They have to leave their treasure behind. But they're allowed to march out with their small arms and their regimental colours, which means a lot to these regimental buffers. So the 6th of January, 1842, the retreat from Kabul begins. And everyone knows that this is not going to end well. On the 6th of January, amid heavy snow, the retreat begins. There's 4,500 troops only left because everyone else has been pulled off and sent off to China. And only 700 of those are European. The rest of them are Biharis who've never seen snow before. And there's 12,000 unarmed camp followers, sellers of chai, the guys that put the tents up, all these, the chowkidars, the kitmagars, all that sort of thing. And so it's 19,000 men, women, and children set off on the 6th of January, and one of those is this man, Colin Mackenzie, my great-great-uncle. And he has a diary of the day. He says, "I always remember as one of the most heart-rending sights of that humiliating day, fixing my eyes by chance on a little Hindustani girl, perfectly naked, sitting in the snow, with no mother or father near her. She was a beautiful little girl, about 2 years old, just strong enough to sit upright with her little legs doubled underneath her, hair curling in waving locks around her soft little throat, and her great black eyes, dilated to twice their normal size, fixed on the armed men, the passing cavalry, and all the strange sights that met her gaze. Many other children as young and innocent I saw slain on the road, and women with their long dark hair wet with their own blood. The rear guard had to fight the whole way to Bagrami, the camping site, and pass through a literally continuous line of poor wretches, men, women, and children, dead or dying from colds and wounds, who, unable to move, entreated their comrades to kill them and put an end to their misery." So the British make the same mistake they made at the beginning of the siege. They don't guard their commissariat. So the first out is the cavalry, Skinner's horse in their yellow uniforms. Next out is the infantry, followed last of all by the Hindustani camp followers, all these Biharis, these Awadis, carrying the tents, the food, and the guns. And of course, the Afghans pour out of Kabul, because the cavalry's gone over the bridge, the infantry's gone, and no one is guarding the baggage. So they just seize the baggage. They seize the food and they seize the ammunition. So by 4 in the afternoon, the first cavalry have reached the camping site, and there's a lot of, "Where's my tent? Where's my bearer? Where's dinner? Where's my sherry?" No sherry, no bearer, no dinner, no tent. By 10 o'clock at night, still no bearer, no dinner, no tent, and now it's minus 35 degrees, and the whole of the sky is lit up red with the burning cantonments. And at this point, the penny drops that this is not going to end well at all. They've got no food. Their cantonment is on flames. They can't go back. They've got limited ammunition, only what they carried the day they left. All the backup is gone. And Jalalabad is 6 days' march. And it's not even clear whether the road is open because it's the middle of winter. They haven't had any post or any letters from there. And even in the best of times, it's 6 days' march, and they've got no food, no ammunition. Now, Colin Mackenzie's lucky because he's traveling with the Jezailchis. These are the Afghan mercenaries who've been recruited, who've stayed loyal, and they know how to handle winter fighting, unlike the Biharis and all the Hindustanis who've got no idea what to do in the snow. So the Afghans tell him what to do. They say, dig a big circle in the snow, dig a foxhole, put a fire in the middle, use whatever wood you can find, burn it in the middle, and then everybody lie side by side, like petals in a daisy or something, with your feet facing the fire. Take off all your extraneous shawls and drape it over, and use your own body heat and your neighbor's body heat to keep you alive. And this is quite useful if ever you find yourselves on a camping trip. This is what you should do. And you wake up in the morning, it hasn't been a very comfy night, no one's had a good night's sleep, but everyone's still got their bits intact. Unlike the poor Hindustanis, who've just fallen asleep on the snow, they wake up to find their fingers black with frostbite. It's been hit -50 overnight. And their feet are black, their fingers are black, they can't walk, they can't use their muskets, they're completely incapacitated. A lot of them are just dead. These stiff bodies lying in the snow. No, half the army doesn't get up the following morning. And at this point, Wazir Akbar Khan, the Afghan leader, comes up and he drives like a shepherd the entire army, those that can crawl at all, into the Kurd-Kabul Pass, where inevitably the most phenomenal ambush has been arranged. And 3 miles into the pass, in the narrowest point where only 2 men can walk abreast, lines of trenches have been prepared. And no one can see these Afghans, their white turbans in the snow, completely invisible. But as they pass, the ambush is sprung. Lady Sale, who has just burnt the remains of her grand piano, is in the lead. The confusion was fearful. We had not proceeded half a mile when we were heavily fired upon. The pony Mrs. Sturt rode was wounded in the ear and the neck. I fortunately had only one musket ball in my arm. 3 others passed through my cloak near the shoulder without doing me injury. The pass completely choked up, and for a considerable period we were stationary under heavy fire. That night, the sepoys and camp followers, half frozen, tried to force their way into my bed. Many poor wretches died around me in the night. Many women and children were abducted. So at night, 19,000 men, women and children leave on the 6th of January. By the following morning, it's down to only 12,000. 7,000 died in the night or in the first day's conflict. Through the Kurd-Kabul Pass, another 5,000 are killed. So it's down to, where are we now? 7,000. They have to then, those 7,000 have to march up to the very top of the Tezin Pass on the 3rd day, where they get caught in the most almighty blizzard. There's a complete whiteout. They get snowblind. They're stumbling around, frostbite, still no tents. They haven't eaten for 3 days. As they come down from the Tezin Pass to the village of Jigdalik at the bottom of the pass, another major ambush has been prepared. The road is blocked by a holly hedge. They reach it, they're snowblind, they can't see much as they come down, and it's the evening now, it's 6 o'clock. The cavalry try and scramble over this holly hedge. They're shot down by the ambush. They're trampled by their own cavalry. Of the 2,000 who make it to the holly hedge, only 300 make it over. And they are surrounded at dawn the following day on the hilltop of Gundamuk. And by this stage, they only have about 4 rounds each left. So they fire off their rounds, and then they do a couple of bayonet charges. And then the Afghans realize they have no ammunition left, so they just pull back and snipe from a distance. 1 man is taken hostage. This man, Thomas Suter, who has the regimental colors wrapped around him. 14 cavalry make it as far as the Nimla Gardens, Shah Jahan's great gardens outside Jalalabad, built the same time as the Shalimar Gardens in Lahore or the Wagh Gardens outside the Pakistani nuclear facilities. Anyway, so there's still Malis here, there's still an endowment to support the Malis, and as the cavalry arrive, exhausted, They say, can we give you naan and must, bread and yogurt? They get off the cavalry, get off their horses, eat their breakfast, and then they're clobbered to death by the gardeners. One man makes it through to Jalalabad. Dr. Bryden, a Scotsman, of course. He has Blackwood's magazine, which is the great literary journal of its day, wrapped up in his hat. And so when they take a swipe at him, it goes through the leather binding of the Blackwood's magazine. It's a bound volume. Quite what he was doing with this thing on his head, history doesn't relate, but he put it in his hat, and it stops the sword, and he arrives with a small cut in his head, but his skull basically intact. The horse dies. One man. In fact, it turns out, contrary to legends, just to slightly spoil the story, about 8 Gurkhas appear out of the hills over the following 2-3 days. Gurkhas know how to survive in the snow. Even more bizarrely, a Greek merchant, Mr. Banès, turns up 3 days later. He's run the bazaar in the cantonment. He's presumably been sitting in a cave somewhere drinking ouzo and eating kebabs or whatever, but anyway, he turns up. But that aside, of an army of 19,000 men, women and children, basically one officer has made it through. And the whole of the rest of the army has been cut apart or enslaved. Many of the sepoys are simply stripped of their clothes and shoved out into the snow to die. Others, the more able-bodied, the ones that haven't been frostbitten, are sold off to Uzbek slavers. The Uzbeks have a particularly gruesome way with their captives. They tie a horsehair rope. They sew a horsehair rope through your clavicle and attach the other end to the saddle. And they tie your hands behind your back, and if you don't keep up with the slaver on the horse, your entire chest frame is wrenched out of sync. It apparently breaks a man's spirit within a day, being dragged behind a horse with this thing attached to you. But some of the sepoys escaped, and it's those sepoys, the escaped sepoys like Subadar Bakh Khan, who are the first to rise up in Meerut on the 10th of May, 1857, in the next round of this story. But for the British, this is their big imperial defeat. At a time when the British Empire is used to getting its way anywhere in the world, using its superior military-industrial technology to defeat cavalry armies who haven't got enough cannon, which is why they get an enormous shock when they take on Ranjit Singh, because he has very good cannon, and why they have massive losses in the Anglo-Sikh wars in the way they don't in any other war. But at a time when they're used to defeating anyone very easily, this is not just a defeat, it's a complete wipeout. And is an enormous knock to the confidence. But for the Afghans, this is a huge victory. This is, for the Afghans, what the freedom struggle is for India, what Bannockburn and Robert the Bruce is for the Scots, what Yorktown and Washington is to the Americans, what Garibaldi and the Risorgimento is to the Italians, what the Easter Rising and Michael Collins is to the Irish. This is to the Afghans. This is their central national myth, their central national story of victory, the forging of a nation out of oppression. Which is why today in Kabul, the main diplomatic area, the Chanakya Puri of Kabul, is named after Wazir Akbar Khan, who led the resistance. Afghan historians have written wonderfully about it. Only a handful came back alive from this war, wounded and destitute. The rest of the English fell with neither grave nor shroud to cover them, and lay scattered in our land like rotting donkeys. For the English love gold and money so much that they cannot stop themselves from laying their hands on any area productive of wealth. But what prize did they find in Afghanistan? Except on the one hand the exhausting of their treasury, and on the other hand the disgracing of their army. It is said that 40,000 English troops had been in Kabul. Many were taken captive en route. Others remained as cripples and beggars, and the rest perished in the mountains, like a ship sunk without trace. For it is no easy thing to invade and occupy the kingdom of Khorasan. The English hoped to establish themselves in Afghanistan to block any Russian advance, but for all the treasure they expended and for all the lives they sacrificed, the only result was ruin and disgrace. If the English had been able to take and keep Afghanistan, would they really have left this land where 44 different types of grape grow? And other fruit as well: apples, pomegranates, pears, rhubarb, mulberries, sweet watermelon and muskmelon, apricot and peaches, and ice water that cannot be found in all the plains of India. These Indians know neither how to dress nor how to eat. God save me from the fire of their dal and their miserable chapatis. That's the final Afghan word on this war. When I was researching this book, just a little afterward, there were two things I really wanted to do. One was to collect any Afghan sources, because this is a much written story, but always from the British point of view. And it became very quickly clear on visiting Kabul in 2009 at the beginning of this project that there was, in fact, a huge quantity of Afghan sources. And the man who helped me find it was the then professor of history and also the Vice Chancellor of Kabul University, a man called Ashraf Ghani, who is now the president. And he brought down from his own shelves volume after volume of original Persian stories, some chronicles, some epic poems, which tell the story. Because this is the big story. This is their big, what Ranjit Singh is to the Punjab, this is really for the Afghans. And there are many accounts of varying accuracy and fictionalization. And so all written in Persian and all very easily accessible. A lot of it reprinted. Afghan historians know this stuff backwards, but it's never made it into English. And not a single English account of this war uses even one line of a Persian source. And this is one of the strange things about imperial history. And I found it to be as true about 1857 when I was writing the last Mughal as it is. You find that so often you have two parallel streams of history. In India, you have the Urdu wallahs using Urdu sources, but not using English sources and writing in Urdu for their own audience. You have the Hindi writers writing in Hindi, using Hindi sources, but not writing in English. And you have the English speakers, including all the kind of JNU post-colonialists, using English sources, but not actually bothering to learn Persian by and large, and translating. And in 1857, there's these huge sources sitting in Delhi, the mutiny papers, 20,000 scraps of paper from the mutineers' camp. All the receipts, all the invoices, all the regimental guard lists, all the muster rolls, all sitting there. And used by a few Urdu historians, completely unused by the two huge university departments sitting in Delhi, JNU and Delhi University. Simply had not accessed this stuff. And it's much easier to write a post-colonial thesis spinning Ebud Said and writing using English sources and some reprinted travel books than it is to learn Shikasta script and go into the archives and sit there being nibbled by mosquitoes in the nasty government undercroft for 5 years. And the same is true in this. That there's, in India, in Afghanistan, is easier because a lot of this stuff is printed. In the 60s, there was a very good Afghan nationalist historical movement. A lot of the secondary stuff now reads as very sort of patriotically best-beating, but the sources were reprinted in modern Persian and are easily accessible. And that was the main source of the book. But the second half of the story was traveling the route. And I found a tribal chieftain who I was given an introduction to, who lived in Jagdalik, the village of the Holly Hedge. And he'd just come in from the Taliban, and he took me under his protection, took me along the route of the retreat. And at the village of Gandamak, I had a very interesting conversation with the tribal elders. And I said, do you see any similarity between the current campaign and this one? And they just said it's exactly the same. Both times the foreigners come here for their own interests, not for ours. They say, we are your friends, we want to help, but they are lying. Whoever comes to Afghanistan, even now, they said, will face the fate of Burns and McNaughton. We are the roof of the world. From here you can control and watch everywhere. Afghanistan is like a crossroads for every nation that comes to power. But we do not have the strength to control our own destiny. Our fate is determined by our neighbors. And then one of the old men told me a story. He said, last month, one of the American officers called us to a hotel in Jalalabad for a meeting. And one of them asked me, "Why do you hate us?" And I replied, this is the old man speaking, "Because you blow down our doors, you enter our houses, you pull our women by the hair, and you kick our children. We cannot accept this. We will fight back, and we will break your teeth. And when your teeth are broken, you will leave, just as the British and the Russians left before you. It's just a matter of time." What did he say to that, I asked. He turned to his friend and said, "If the old men are like this, what will the younger ones be like? In truth, all the Americans here know their game is over. It's just their politicians who deny it. This is the last days of the Americans," he said. "Next, it will be China."
Well, thank you, sir, for the spectacular session. It was very, very informative. Thank you very much.